Kind of a busy weekend for the Blue Jackets, considering it's still preseason. A player got claimed on waivers. They lost again. And is the opening night roster set? And what does that mean for goaltending? We're going to talk about all of that and more on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before getting started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the app now by visiting FanDuel.com, and you can win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, lots to talk about. Obviously, the preseason game happened on Saturday. It sure was 60 minutes of hockey. The waiver claims have gone through, and there was kind of an unsurprising claim in Daemon Hunt, but that does mean that the opening night roster is pretty much set. So, I want to talk about basically all of that stuff. Let's talk about the Daemon Hunt claim first, because that's what happened first. And I am unsurprised by this, and I'm not like on the surface of things like this is fine, right? I don't think Daemon Hunt was ever going to move the needle at the NHL level. Like, he could have potentially been a decent bottom four ad at a certain point, but it feels like a lot of the prospects that they have cooking right now would have to miss for Daemon Hunt to get his shot, right? I know the organization was high on him. I didn't think he had a particularly good preseason. I think he didn't really move the needle for me at all. And I am surprised and not surprised that he got claimed, right? Surprised that he did get claimed because players basically never get claimed on waivers. There's been like 5 players claimed on waivers the entire preseason, right? And just, bad luck that Daemon Hunt happened to be one of them. But I'm also not surprised that he went back to Minnesota. News out of Minnesota is basically that they've got injuries to some of their bottom pairing guys. I want to say Jonas Brodin is hurt right now. So they basically just want a guy to play there until he's healthy. And then they wouldn't be surprised if he goes back on waivers, which as far as I'm concerned, and I might be mistaken for this, the Blue Jackets basically get first dibs on Hunt if he goes back on waivers. And if we do claim him, then he can go down to Cleveland. So this might all work out, and even if it doesn't, is the other thing. Like, again, I was never super high on Daemon Hunt. I thought he was fine for the Monsters last season. I still think that the first-round pick was the big return from Juracek, and it looks like that's going to pan out. Very, very early to say, obviously, but, like, here's the thing. Regardless of what you think of the trade and of Hunt, etc., it doesn't feel like great asset management, right? Of you jettison this promising young player that has had struggles in the NHL and is, I think, was 21 when he got traded, if that. You get your first round pick, you get a young roster player back, a quote unquote roster player, and a handful of other picks, right? The first round pick you use on a player that is not going to be in the NHL until 2030 at least. And the player that you got back, you lose on waivers to the team that traded him to you in the first place, right? Again, it's not a massive deal. It's not the end of the world. I'm not going to sit here like saying that this is going to be the thing that sends the Blue Jackets spiraling back into lottery contention. But I do think it's not great asset management, right? It's similar to the Line A trade of, Jordan Harris, you didn't qualify him, right? He was an RFA and you let him go to UFA. Now he's in Boston. I don't know what happened with the second round pick that the Blue Jackets got. That the Blue Jackets sent to Montreal. I don't know if they've picked that pick. I don't know if they have traded that somewhere else to bolster their lineup. I'm trying to find that pick right now to see if I can figure out where it is. Okay, so it's a 2026 second round pick. They still have it. I don't know that they'll pick I don't know that they'll pick a needle mover there necessarily, but again, you're paying a player and a second round pick for Jordan Harris, who you let go for free. You know, I understand. I'm actually talking to my wonderful friend and coworker Laura Saber of Locked On Canadians about this. The plan was that they didn't want to retain on line A, right? So they took a weaker return because Montreal was like, yes, we'll take the full cap hit. Again, in hindsight, not great. At the time, I thought it was fine, and I thought it was not necessary, maybe, but like understandable, right? Knowing what we know now, that they would have approximately $1 bajillion in cap space, I wonder if they would have retained and taken a better return. You know, not had to include that second round pick. Who knows, right? But it's becoming a little bit of a worrying trend, right? I feel like Don Waddell's asset management is one of his weaker aspects of being a GM, right? So, and what's going to happen? Maybe Daemon Hunt comes back. I could certainly see that happening again. It sounds like from the Minnesota side of things, they're basically looking for a temporary fix to the Jonas Brodin problem. And I don't know enough about Minnesota to know what their defensive depth is, but because they've claimed him off waivers, they have to either put him back on waivers if they want to send him to Iowa or keep him on the roster. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but if they do put him back on waivers, then I can almost guarantee that the Blue Jackets will be like, yeah, no, we'll just take him back, right? There was a player a couple of seasons ago that this happened to, and I don't remember who off the top of my head, but I believe the Oilers were involved, and it was Raphael Lavoie, maybe. He got put on waivers and the team claimed him, and then he got put on waivers and his original team claimed him back. And it went back and forth like that a shocking amount of times before I think he finally ended up in the AHL. But like I could see that happening with Daemon Hunt. I wouldn't be at all surprised. But I don't think that Daemon Hunt getting claimed on waivers is that much of a disaster in terms of on ice product, right? I know I talked a whole thing about he's going to be on the opening night roster again. I still didn't see the same thing from him that the Blue Jackets coaches and management have seen, and you know maybe that's a me problem. I don't know, but this is not really an end of the world type thing, right? Next guy up. You know, the Blue Jackets have a ton of bottom pairing defensemen that they can plug in instead, right? Now they don't have to carry 8 defensemen. They, I believe, are going to carry 3 goalies, and we'll talk about that in a second here. But I believe the opening night roster is going to be 13 forwards, 7 defensemen, 3 goalies, which is not a configuration we see a ton, I believe. But I do wonder if a certain Russian goaltender has played well enough to kind of keep himself in the conversation for the NHL job. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. I want to talk about last night's game, or Saturday night's game, I should say, because I'm recording this on Sunday evening. I want to talk a little bit about that, and I want to talk a little bit about the preseason as a whole, because the Blue Jackets were 2-5 in the preseason, which is not great. However, preseason doesn't matter. What matters now is Thursday's game and going forward, right? So we'll talk a little bit about preseason. We'll talk a little bit about Saturday's game, all coming up in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Monarch Money. I don't know about you, but I can't name all my financial accounts. I don't know what they're worth. 401ks, properties, investments, all of that. And if you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It is an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface, whether that's on your laptop or your phone. And it's built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It does all of the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I'm on vacation right now, and I am spending probably a little bit more than I should have done. But Monarch is keeping me on track. It's keeping me apprised of where my money is going and how much money I have left. And it's telling me that maybe I don't need that second $8 latte in 2 days, right? Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for 50% off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked about Daemon Hunt. I want to talk about the preseason game on Saturday and kind of the preseason as a whole, because I think it's fair to say that it's been kind of a disappointing preseason. I do feel like the Blue Jackets tend to have disappointing preseasons, and this might be just because I was thinking about it the other day, but I feel like the last time that we had a really good, proper, promising preseason that had everyone being like, oh, what are the Blue Jackets going to do, would have been the 2015-16 season, which you will remember as the season that they started 0-8. So, sometimes preseason is what it is. Sometimes it goes well. Sometimes it goes badly. Sometimes it goes well, and you convince yourself that Ryan Johansson is the top line center of the future, and you're going to tear teams apart with Brandon Saad and Nick Foligno as your top line wingers. Sometimes it's like that. So again, I'm not really willing to sit here and say that a disappointing preseason is kind of, oh, well, the regular season's going to suck. They're just going to continue to get mown through by teams. It's been a weird preseason. I feel like very few of the games have had the entire roster, right? It might genuinely be one or two games had the entire roster. They've had a lot of the early games, especially had a lot of AHL guys, had a lot of junior players, a lot of tweeners, a lot of guys like, for example, Brendan Smith, who got released from his PTO, Marcus Casey, who got released from his camp invite, etc., right? So really, there's only been a couple of games where they've had, I would say there's only been maybe 3 games total where they've had their entire top 6 and top 4 on defense in place. And even then, I feel like they haven't had their starting goalies necessarily for those games either. So there's a lot of, I say starting goalies because, and we'll talk about goalies in a minute, but we don't know who the starting goalie is going to be yet. So, even games that have had the full lineup haven't necessarily had one of Elvis or Jet starting, which again, we'll get into that in a second. But I thought Saturday's game was just kind of a real January of a game, everyone is tired. No one really wants to be there. No Sean Monahan, no Zach Werenski. We're experiencing top line centers Dmitry Voronkov and top left defenseman Jake Christensen, right? It was always going to be kind of an adventure. Logan Thompson, very good goalie. That's mostly what I took away from that game, is that, and I believe he played the entire game the first time these teams faced off on, I want to say, Tuesday of last week. He had a very good game then as well. So partially it's that, partially it's the line jiggery. There's lots of moving parts that I think will kind of add up. I thought Elvis was fine. Not game-breakingly good. That second goal, the Dubois goal, I think he probably wants back. I hate saying that. Goalies want all of their goals back. That's how this works, right? The goalies are never going to be like, actually, no, they can have that one. But I think that second one specifically was probably one that I think Elvis would play differently. The first goal, the Chisholm goal, I think it was. I don't know what Charlie Coyle was doing. I don't think Charlie Coyle knew what Charlie Coyle was doing. Just a kind of a not great defensive zone meltdown from someone who is supposed to be really quite good in the defensive zone. So I'm hoping that we don't see too much of that. Again, second goal, beaten clean by Dubois from Elvis. I will say that I don't know why the first 2 players back were Damon Severson and Dmitry Voronkov. But I think, again, we're going to see a lot of Ivan Provorov doesn't really want to back check this season. And that was, again, I don't know where he was. I don't know if he pinched and made a mistake. He just wasn't there. So hopefully we don't see too much of that. But overall, I don't think anyone had a terrible game necessarily. I thought the Blue Jackets had a lot of good looks, just couldn't beat Thompson. And I thought that again, Elvis was fine. Maybe his best game of the preseason, which is not saying much. But I thought he was, again, like, didn't actively have a meltdown in the game and cost the Blue Jackets, right? And it was a 2-1 game. Blue Jackets struggled to score basically for the entire preseason. I think they scored 14 goals total over 7 games, which is not the kind of scoring that we got used to last year. And I believe that of those 14 goals, Mathieu Olivier had 3 of them. So again, kind of preseason's weird, man. Mathieu Olivier probably played more minutes than a lot of the guys that you would expect to be scoring. So again, that's mostly why I don't tend to like look at preseason as this is absolutely what this team is going to be, right? Because this team, like, this is not what this team is going to be, because you've got Mathieu Olivier playing on the top line for 3 of those games, right? So again, disappointing. I don't like to watch the team lose. Sucks. I hate to lose to Washington specifically. Not the end of the world. If 2 weeks into the season we're still seeing all of these issues of the team's forgotten how to score and no one apparently knows how to play defense anymore, then maybe we'll worry about that then. But right now I'm just kind of like, yeah, preseason's preseason, man. The good news is that the game did not turn out like the Tampa Bay, Florida game, where they, I think, hit like 280 penalty minutes, and there was like 14 attempted murders. So it could have, the game could have gone like that, and it didn't. So I'm gonna call it not a win, but definitely could have been worse, right? We're going to take another quick break, and then I want to talk about the opening night roster, but I want to specifically talk about the goaltending, because that, to me, is the biggest question mark right now, in terms of, well, they're rolling 3 goalies. Why are they rolling 3 goalies? So we'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. New customers can bet $5, and if it comes through, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets that you can spend on whatever you want. That's right. All you got to do is pick a bet, find the heaviest favorite you can, put $5 down, and if it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I was using the Chargers as the Chiefs as an example for this, and then they went 0-2. So I started using the Eagles, and then they lost to, I believe, the Denver Broncos about 4 hours ago. So maybe I'm going to stop telling people what to bet on. You pick your bet, you put $5 down, and if it hits, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use wherever you want. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the app today and get started. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked about defense a little bit. We've talked about how the preseason is not the be all and end all, but for me, what I want to talk about now is the goaltending, because the goaltending has been kind of up and down, more ups than downs, really, but not the guys that I think needed to really. Okay, what I'm going to say here is, I think that the most important goalie during preseason needed to be Elvis Merzlikins, right? Like, he needed to have an excellent preseason, because Jack Reeves is knocking on the door. They brought in Ivan Fedotov, who they're very high on, and Elvis, I think, is experiencing actual real competition in goal for the first time since like his rookie season, right? Like, he didn't really get challenged by Tarasov for a lot of his time here, because Tarasov was always injured or, was winning games, but allowing 4 or 5 goals in those games, right? And then before that was Korpisalo, who the organization had decided was not as good as Elvis Merzlikins, and that was reflected in their contract extension situations, right? So right now you've got Jack Reeves, the heir apparent, it seems, coming in. Again, Ivan Fedotov coming in, who has a real... not a chip on his shoulder necessarily, but I think there's that energy, right? When you have had a disappointing time with another team, And this team is like, no, we have faith in this guy. We think he's going to be good. I think that there's something there, like, a new team bump almost. So Elvis needed to be almost perfect in this preseason, and he super was not. So the Blue Jackets are currently carrying 3 goalies, which I'm kind of surprised by. Obviously, things can change. The opening night roster is not due until tomorrow or tonight at 5 p.m. Eastern. So things could still change. And because of how I'm cursed, my guess is that things will change probably in about 2 hours' time after you listen to this. But as of right now, they're carrying 3 goalies. And the interesting thing is, based on just the preseason, Ivan Fedotov was actually the best performing goalie of the 3. He played 2 full games, had a .950 save percentage, allowed only 2 goals on the 40 shots that he faced, which is pretty darn good. And again, I know preseason, he allowed 2 goals. He was supposed to allow almost 3.5. So his expected goals against was 3.55. Jet Greaves also did quite well. Allowed 6 goals on 72 shots, had a .917 save percentage, and had an expected goals against of 8.5. So allowed about 2.5 goals less than expected. Now, Elvis, 67 shots against, 7 goals, an .896 save percentage, and allowed about 1.5 goals more than he was supposed to, based on expected goals against. So, not the most ideal preseason for Elvis. And I think also what you have to remember is that Jet Greaves' stats will be kind of wonky because of how weird that game against Washington was, the Tuesday one, where I think, 2 goals bounced in off of Blue Jackets. 1 was a deflection, and 1 was that weird Tom Wilson one where Dante Fabro's brain just turned off for 3 whole seconds. So, again, Jet Greaves allowed 4 goals in that game, I think, and in the 2.5 games, or the 2 games previous, allowed 2 goals total. So, again, I think that one bad game, again, very small sample size, and I'm couching that and also the Fedotov thing of a very small sample size if he played 2 games. Or I think he played 1 full game and 2 half games, right? Or no, how many minutes are in a game? He played 1 full game and 1 period. So 80 minutes in total. Jet and Elvis played, I think, 2.5 games each. I know how math works. I can do it. But the point I'm trying to make here, right, is that Elvis was by far the weakest goalie in the preseason, which is kind of the opposite of what you wanted from that, right? And even if so, that's all situations. Those numbers, even if you change that to even strength, Ivan Fedotov still had a .933 save percentage. Jet Greaves had a .917, and Elvis had an .893, right? Just the basic numbers of, obviously there's more happening here, but Elvis was not as good as he needed to be this preseason, which I don't know what the plan is for. Again, I don't know what the opening night plan is. I would absolutely play Jet Greaves as the opening night starter. I think he's earned it. But I don't know if this team knows what they're going to do with Elvis yet. That I know that they say they have faith in him and that, he had some real good games last year and he can be a real good goalie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like they're not contractually obliged to say that, but they kind of, what do you want Dean Everson to do? Stand on the podium and be like, no, Elvis is terrible and we hate him. Right? He's not going to do that. So they have to say these things. I do think that the people telling them to waive Elvis are not mistakes, but again, it's wishful thinking, right? It's the same people that think that Damon Severson should be put on waivers. It's wishful thinking. It's not going to happen. He's going to get paid $1 million and $6 million for the next 6 years. He just is. Elvis is going to play out his contract unless they manage to dump the contract in a trade. They're not going to buy him out. They're not going to put him on waivers and bury him in the AHL. It's simply not going to happen. Again, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again, but I really don't feel like I'm wrong about this. Although I never think I'm wrong. So, I do think that he's going to be on a tight leash, though. And I think that's probably why they're carrying Fedotov. I think as soon as Elvis starts to stumble, or if Jet starts to stumble, which is also a possibility, right? But based on the preseason play, I'm more confident in Jet coming out of the gate hot than I am in Elvis right now. And I do think it's going to be as soon as Elvis starts to struggle, starts to falter, Fedotov is there. They can put him in. I am a little bit worried about what this means for the Cleveland Monsters, because right now I think that they're going to be rolling with Zach Sawchenko as their starter and Nolan Lalonde as their backup, which is, again, going to be an adventure. But it looks like Fedotov's staying around for now, and I do think it's that he's basically going to be standing behind Elvis, just kind of looming and waiting. And as soon as you know, it only takes one bad game, right? I think Elvis is on a really, really short leash right now, and I think that's why Fedotov is around. So that's why I think they're carrying 3 goalies. Again, I'm still kind of surprised that they put Hunt on waivers. It sounded like he'd made the team, but I guess they were like, maybe we can sneak him through while 700 other players are on waivers. Didn't work. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. They could also send Fedotov down, call up a different defenseman, call up a forward. Like, this is a real opportunity potentially for Luca Del Balbaluz to get the call up. I don't know, but as of right now, it looks like the opening night is going to be 13 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 3 goalies, which is kind of a surprising combination of players, but is what it is. I was considering making a hot take, and I think I will still make it, but I do think that Fedotov is going to be here for a while. By which I mean, I think he's probably here at least for the month of October. I think he plays more than 2 games in the month of October. I don't know how many games the Blue Jackets have off the top of my head, but I do think that it's going to be, as soon as Elvis has a bad game, I think it's going to be, right, we're going to put Fedotov in, or, Jet's going to start and Fedotov's going to back up. But I do think that Fedotov's really, really strong preseason play was promising, especially when you consider he played a bunch of the early games, which were made up almost entirely of like AHLers and toddlers, right? When you've got, Brenton Gaunt on your top line, then I feel like I feel like Ivan Fedotov playing well is should be commended, right? But I do think it right now, anyway, to me, it feels like it's Jets' crease to lose. I might be wrong about that. They might just decide to put Elvis in as the opening night starter. That seems like the kind of thing that they would do just to annoy me specifically, or not annoy me specifically, but to spite me specifically after I've just spent a bunch of time talking about, how I think Jet's the guy. But I do think that Jet is going to be the guy. And, we'll have this speculation until Thursday, because my guess is that the team will keep doing the song and dance of, we haven't picked a starter yet. We're going to, see how practice goes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Thursday morning, they'll announce the starter like they haven't had it written on the office for like 4 days straight, right? But that's kind of all I've got. Preseason's over. Thank God. I hate preseason. I know that we're all excited because, hockey is back, but I mostly spend a lot of preseason begging people not to get hurt. And again, maybe that's just like trauma from last season or the season before that, or the season before that, or the season before that, right? But my hope was just, can we get through this preseason, A, without injuries, and B, without drama? And it seems like we were successful in both counts, knock on wood. But disappointing on ice, but kind of nice to have a drama-free, or mostly drama-free off-season, right? I'll be back tomorrow. We'll have a brand new episode. Thank you for listening to this episode, making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. And if you have comments, questions, criticisms, drop me an email at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.